Hey guys, tonight we are going to embark on a journey that is, frankly, one of the most difficult to comprehend in human history. This isn't a story of kings or queens or grand battles with waving flags. It's a story of survival, or more accurately, the impossibility of it. We're going to place you gently into a moment in time where your world, as you know it, is about to end. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. While you're at it, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see where these stories land. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The air is warm and thick, with the familiar sense of home. It's late afternoon, and the sun, a heavy orange disk, is beginning its slow descent, casting long, soft shadows across the packed red earth of your village. You can smell wood smoke from a dozen cooking fires, the sweet, starchy scent of yams roasting, and the faint, dusty aroma of chickens scratching in the dirt. This is the soundtrack of your life, the rhythmic thump 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 of women pounding grain into flour, happy shouts of children playing a game with a worn leather ball, and the low hum of conversation in a language you've known since birth. Your world is small, a collection of round, thatched roof huts arranged in family compounds, all nestled in a clearing carved from the dense, green forest that stretches as far as you know forever. You know the faces of everyone here. You know who is marrying whom, which elder tells the best stories, and which child is most likely to steal a piece of fruit from the market stall. Life is measured by seasons: the planting season, the harvest, the dry season, and by the rituals that mark the passage of time. Of course, it's not a complete paradise. There are disputes between families, worries about the harvest, and the ever-present threat of sickness. But it is a world with rules, with structure, with a sense of belonging. You have a place here. You've heard whispers, of course. Traders who travel further than anyone you know speak of strange men with skin the color of peeled yams, who arrive in massive canoes that dwarf any fishing boat you've ever seen. They say these men come from beyond the horizon, from a place where there is no land, only water. They trade for gold dust, for ivory, and for palm oil. Sometimes they also trade for people. This is a known, yet distant, danger, something that happens to other villages, to rivals, to people captured in wars that have nothing to do with you. A lesser-known fact is that some of the goods they offer in trade are strangely alluring. Brightly colored glass beads, smooth and cool to the touch, and vibrant textiles with patterns you've never seen before. These items have slowly begun to appear in nearby markets, becoming symbols of status. To own them is to have a connection to that distant, powerful world. It's a quiet infiltration, a commercial relationship that masks a terrifying reality. The sun dips lower, painting the sky in shades of purple and pink. The air cools slightly. But tonight, something feels different. The usual chorus of evening insects is strangely muted. The dogs, normally dozing in the shade, are restless, whining softly with their ears pricked. There's a tension in the air, a stillness that feels heavy and wrong. You pause what you're doing, perhaps mending a fishing net or shaping a clay pot, then you listen. It's a faint sound at first, carried on the breeze from the edge of the forest. It's not the sound of a predator like a leopard. It's not the sound of celebration from a neighboring village. It's the sound of running, of panicked shouts in a dialect you don't quite recognize, of wood splintering. The sound of your world beginning to crack. The screams get closer now, cutting through the dusk. The smell of fear, sharpened almost metallic, suddenly overpowers the scent of your evening meal. People in your own compound are starting to move, their faces etched with a confusion that is rapidly turning to terror. Where do you run? The forest that has always been your provider and protector suddenly feels like a trap, the web of social connections. Your family, your neighbors, it's all dissolving into chaos. Historians still fiercely debate the complex web of motivations that led to these initial captures. Was it the result of long-standing intertribal warfare? A new kind of predatory raid driven purely by economic incentive? Or a mix of both for you in this moment? The academic distinctions are meaningless. The only reality is the sound of approaching footsteps, heavy and purposeful. You turned, and standing in the doorway of your family's compound is a silhouette you do not recognize, holding a length of thick, coarse rope. The silhouette doesn't hesitate. In the space of a single heartbeat, the heavy quiet of dread shatters into a cacophony of pure terror. The figure lurches not just at you, but into the heart of your family's space. There is no negotiation, no explanation. Your mind, which a moment ago was contemplating the simple rhythms of evening, is now a vortex of white noise. Your body reacts before your thoughts can catch up, a primal instinct to scramble away, to find cover, but your limbs feel sluggish, tangled in the sudden, thick atmosphere of violence. A rough hand grabs your arm, the grip shockingly strong, lifting you with an ease that speaks of long practice. The world tilts. You see a flash of your mother's face, her mouth open in a silent scream, before she is pulled away by another figure. You hear a sharp, deafening crack that isn't thunder. It's a sound that seems to tear the air itself. Outside, someone screams in a way you have never heard a person scream before. A sound that is cut short with sickening finality. This is the sound of a musket, a piece of technology so alien to your world that it might as well be magic. It is a symbol of a power you cannot comprehend and have no defense against. You are thrown to the ground. The packed earth, usually so familiar and comforting beneath your feet, is now hardened, unforgiving against your cheek. The air is filled with the acrid smell of gunpowder, a scent that will be burned into your memory forever. You see other men, their faces streaked with paint or sweat, moving with brutal efficiency through the village. It's a chillingly common misconception that the raiders were always the pale-faced men from the ships. More often than not, they were fellow Africans from a different kingdom or ethnic group, armed and incentivized by the European raiders waiting on the coast. Their faces are familiar in type, but their expressions are alien, stripped of the shared humanity you took for granted. They speak a language that twists and turns at the edges of your own, familiar enough to understand commands but foreign enough to feel utterly isolating. A rope is looped around your neck, coarse and biting. It's not just a rope, it's a tool of control, and you are pulled to your feet. You are now part of a growing, stumbling collection of your own people. You see your neighbor, a man you shared stories with just yesterday, his eyes wide with a terror that mirrors your own. You see children torn from their parents, their cries lost in the greater noise of the raid. The social fabric of your village, woven over generations, is being shredded in a matter of minutes. The process is horrifically organized. As more people are captured, they are brought to a central point. Here, a different kind of restraint is applied. A long, heavy pole with a fork at the end is forced over your shoulder and onto your neck. This is a slave yoke, or gory. The fork is placed around your throat, and a crossbar is secured in front, trapping your head. Your hands are tied to the bar. You are now tethered to the person in front of you, and someone else is tethered behind you. Your individual identity is gone. You are now a link in a chain of human beings. The weight is immense, not just physically, but psychologically. It forces your head down. It scrapes your spine raw. Your ability to move is dictated entirely by the person in front of you. To stumble is to risk choking yourself or the person behind you. It's an instrument of perfect, dehumanizing control. You are no longer a person, you are cargo, being packaged for transport. Historians still argue about the precise nature of these raiding parties. Were they soldiers from a rival kingdom expanding its power, their actions part of a larger political conflict? Or were they a new kind of mercenary group, whose only allegiance was to the profit promised by the strange men on the coast for those who participated? The motivations were likely complex, a mix of coercion, greed, and the acquisition of European goods like guns, which in turn made them more powerful and capable of capturing more people. It was a vicious, self-perpetuating cycle. Looking back, you catch one last glimpse of your home. It's no longer the place of safety you knew. Huts are burning, the orange flames licking at the twilight sky, consuming the thatch and wood that formed the architecture of your life. The smell of wood smoke, once a comfort, is now the smell of destruction. The captors shout commands, and the human chain lurches forward, away from the ruins. The sounds of your village, the laughter, the pounding of grain, the evening conversations are replaced by the shuffle of bare feet on dirt, the clink and scrape of wood on bone, and the low, continuous sound of weeping. You are being marched into the forest, but this time, the familiar green canopy offers no comfort. It is simply the beginning of a path leading into darkness. The darkness of the forest is now absolute. The moon, if it's even out, is hidden by the thick, overlapping leaves of the canopy. Your world has shrunk to the few feet of trodden path illuminated by the occasional swinging lantern carried by one of your captors. The forest, which you once navigated with ease, is now a terrifying maze. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves, sends a jolt of fear through you, but you cannot turn your head to see. The wooden yoke forces your gaze forward, fixed on the back of the person in front of you, their shoulders slumped in a silhouette of despair. The march is relentless. There are no pauses for rest, no consideration for the weak or the young. The pace is set by the captors, a steady, unyielding trudge. Your feet, accustomed to the soft earth of the village paths, are now being torn apart by sharp rocks, thorns, and tangled roots you can't see in the dark. A stumble sends a shockwave through the line. The person behind you collides with your back, the yoke digging deeper into your neck, making you gasp for air. A sharp curse from a guard, perhaps a blow from the flat of a blade, is the only encouragement offered. Pain is the language of this journey. You are not alone in your suffering. All around you is the sound of it, the soft, rhythmic sobbing of someone a few people ahead, the strained, heavy breathing of an elder behind you, the occasional whimpered cry of a child. But there is no comfort to be offered. Your hands are tied. Your voice is a risk. Solidarity is a luxury you no longer have. The yoke and the rope that binds you to others serve a dual purpose. They prevent escape, but they also enforce isolation, turning your fellow captives from a community into a collection of individual miseries. The air, thick and humid, is heavy with the smell of sweat and fear. Thirst begins its insidious work. Your throat is a desert, your tongue thick and clumsy in your mouth. You think of the cool water from the village well, a simple daily act you never once considered a blessing, and the memory is a form of torture. There is no water given. You are livestock, and your needs are secondary to the need to get you to your destination. A little known and brutal reality of this march was the concept of expendable cargo. If someone, an elder, a child, or someone weakened by the raid could not keep up, they posed a risk to the entire caravan. Slowing down was not an option. The captor's solution was swift and pragmatic. The line would halt briefly. The person would be untied and unshackled, and simply left behind. Or worse, the logic was cold. It was better to lose one than to risk the entire investment by being delayed. Every captive in the line understood this unspoken rule. To fall was to be abandoned. This knowledge becomes a new kind of fuel, a desperate will to place one foot in front of the other, no matter how much it hurts. Days bleed into nights, and nights into days. The passage of time becomes a blur, marked only by the changing light that filters through the canopy and the gnawing emptiness in your stomach. Occasionally, the line is stopped, and a meager portion of food is distributed, a handful of boiled millet or a piece of dried meat, just enough to keep you moving. You eat with your tied hands, awkwardly, desperately, shoving the food into your mouth before the march begins again. This journey could last for weeks, sometimes even months, depending on how far inland your village was. You cross rivers, The cold water a brief, shocking relief on your torn feet, but also a danger. You navigate treacherous hillsides where a slip could be fatal. You see the landscape of your world change from the dense forest you knew to open savanna, the sun beating down mercilessly, adding sunburn and heat exhaustion to your list of torments. During this long trek, you see other groups like yours, other lines of yoked people being herded by armed guards. Sometimes they are from rival tribes you recognize, other times they are complete strangers, their faces etched with the same numb shock as yours. You are all converging, funneled from 100 different tragedies toward a single, unknown destination. The sheer scale of it is staggering. This isn't a random act of violence against your village, it's a vast, organized system. Historians still debate the full extent of the demographic impact this had on the interior of the continent. How many were lost on these forced marches long before they ever saw the coast, or a ship? The records are sparse, kept only by the profit and loss margins of the traders. But for you, the only statistic that matters is the person who was walking behind you yesterday, who is no longer there today. Their absence is a silent, terrifying warning. The line shuffles forward, one step at a time, deeper into a world you no longer recognize as your own. After weeks of walking, a new element enters the sensory landscape, gradually overpowering the smell of dirt, sweat, and vegetation. It's a sharp, briny scent, carried on a breeze that feels different, heavier, more humid. Salt. You've tasted it in food, but you've never smelled it like this, thickened, pervasive in the air. The sounds change too. A low, continuous roar. A sound so vast and deep it seems to come from the earth itself. It's the sound of the ocean, a concept that, until now, was just a story told by elders. The path widens. The trees thin out, and then you see it. Not the water itself, but the structure that stands before it, a fortress. It's unlike any building you have ever seen. Not made of mud or wood or thatch, but of stone, huge blocks of it, fitted together to create towering, impenetrable walls. It seems to have grown out of the shoreline, a monstrous gray outcrop against the blue of the sky. This is a slave castle, a place with names like Almena or Cape Coast Castle. For you, it has no name. It is simply the end of the road. It is the point of no return. The guard shove your line forward, through a massive arched gateway and into a sun-bleached courtyard. The sudden, bright light is blinding after the gloom of the forest. The heat reflecting off the stone walls is intense, but it's the human noise that is most overwhelming. There are hundreds of people here, maybe thousands, packed into the open space. They are from dozens of different ethnic groups, speaking a bewildering array of languages. The air buzzes with a symphony of fear, confusion, and despair, wishing you a pleasant experience. This is a processing center for human beings. Your yoke is finally removed, the heavy wood lifted from your raw, chafed neck. The brief moment of physical relief is immediately replaced by a new kind of violation. You are stripped of the tattered remains of your clothing. You stand naked, exposed, under the indifferent gaze of your captors and the pale-faced man who now appear, walking with an air of ownership along the castle ramparts. These are the Europeans. Their skin, burned pink by the sun, their strange, restrictive clothing, their clipped, guttural languages, they are everything the stories described, and more terrifying. You are shoved into a line and subjected to an inspection. It's not a medical check for your well-being, but an appraisal, like a farmer examining livestock. One of the pale men, perhaps a ship's surgeon or captain, walks down the line. He forces your mouth open to inspect your teeth, checking for age and disease. He runs his hands over your limbs, testing your muscle, looking for signs of weakness or injury. He is assessing your value as a piece of merchandise. A brand is heated in a nearby fire, its glow a terrifying orange. The smell of burning flesh and hair fills the courtyard as one by one, people are marked. A hot iron is pressed against your skin, your shoulder, your chest, your back. The searing pain is sharp and absolute. You are no longer just a captive, you are property. stamped with the logo of the company that now owns you. It's a chillingly bureaucratic detail that these castles often had chapels, sometimes directly above the dungeons where the captives were held. While the European officers and traders prayed to their god upstairs, hundreds of human beings were suffering in unimaginable conditions just a few feet below them. This paradox of profound religious piety existing alongside systematic, brutal cruelty is something historians and theologians continue to grapple with. How did they reconcile these two realities? The answer likely lies in the pervasive, chilling ideology of dehumanization. Once branded, you are herded toward another doorway, a low, dark opening that leads down a set of stone steps. The air that flows out of it is a physical force, a wave of heat, stench, and despair. This is the entrance to the dungeon, the holding pen. The darkness is almost total, broken only by thin slivers of light from tiny, high-up air holes. The floor is slick with a horrifying mixture of mud, waste, and vomit. The stench of ammonia, dysentery, and unwashed bodies is so thick you can taste it. You are pushed into the crowded space. There is no room to lie down, barely enough room to stand. You are pressed against other bodies, all of them sweating, trembling, and utterly anonymous in the gloom. This is where you will wait. It could be days, it could be weeks. You wait for the arrival of the ship, the floating canoe from the stories. You have no concept of time in this stinking darkness. The only markers are the twice daily distributions of a watery, tasteless, gruel and a meager ration of water, just enough to keep you alive. In the dungeon, the final vestiges of your old life are stripped away. Your name is gone. Your home is a fading memory. The brand on your skin is a permanent reminder of your new status. The only thing you have left is the terrified, racing beat of your own heart. Above you, you can hear the faint sounds of life from the fortress, the tramp of soldiers' boots, the distant call of a trumpet, perhaps even the sound of their church bells. They are sounds from another world, a world that has judged you, condemned you, and is now waiting to ship you into an unknown oblivion. The days in the dungeon bleed into one another, a monotonous cycle of darkness, hunger, and suffocating proximity to others. Then, one day, there's a change. A new energy ripples through the castle above. You hear a surge of activity, shouted orders in that foreign, clipped tongue, the heavy thud of cargo being moved. A different kind of anticipation, sharpened metallic, fills the air. The ship has arrived. The dungeon door is thrown open, flooding the space with a rectangle of blinding, painful light. The guards are here, their silhouettes dark against the brightness. They are rough, impatient. They begin pulling people out of the darkness, herding you up the stone steps and back into the sun-drenched courtyard. You squint, your eyes watering, trying to adjust. Your skin, pale from weeks in the dark, prickles under the sudden, fierce heat of the sun. You are shoved into another line. This time, there's a new element of restraint. Heavy iron shackles are brought out. A thick, cold manacle is hammered shut around your ankle. It's connected by a short, heavy chain to the ankle of another person. You are now bound together in pairs. The weight is awkward, forcing you into a clumsy, shuffling gait. Another chain might link your wrists, or a rope might be looped again around your neck, connecting you to a larger group. The message is clear even in this final stage. Control is absolute. The great gates of the fortress are opened, the ones that led not back to the land you came from, but toward the roaring sound of the water. You are forced through a final, narrow passageway, sometimes called the door of no return. For you, it's just a dark tunnel leading to a terrifying new reality. As you emerge onto the sandy beach, you see it for the first time. It's bigger than you could have possibly imagined. It's not a canoe. It's a mountain of wood, floating on the water. 3 massive poles, taller than any tree in your village, stretch toward the sky, tangled with a spitter-bearer of ropes. The hull, dark and weathered, rises out of the water like a cliff face. It seems impossible that such a thing can float. It looks unnatural, a dead thing on the living water. This is the slave ship. It's a peculiar detail of naval architecture, But many of these ships were not purpose-built for transporting human beings. Many were originally general cargo ships, merchantmen, or even old naval vessels, retrofitted for the slave trade. Carpenters would build extra decking below the main deck below, claustrophobic platform of rough, unfinished planks designed to maximize the number of bodies that could be crammed into the hold. This was a simple question of maximizing profit per square foot. To you, it's a floating coffin in waiting. The sight of the ship, combined with the endless, churning expanse of the ocean, provokes a new wave of terror among the captives. This is the great water the elders spoke of, the end of the world. Some people panic. They scream, they resist, they throw themselves on the sand, refusing to go further. The response is swift and brutal. The guards use whips and the butts of their muskets to beat people into submission. The message is simple: resistance is futile and will only be met with more pain. You are forced to wade into the surf. The water, surprisingly cold, swirls around your ankles, your knees. The heavy iron shackles feel like an anchor, trying to pull you down. The waves crash against you, unsteadying you. You are being herded towards smaller boats, long rowboats, which will ferry you from the shore to the massive ship waiting at anchor. Getting into these long boats is another chaotic, terrifying struggle. You are pushed and pulled over the side, landing in a heap on the wet floorboards, tangled with other chained bodies. The boat rocks violently in the waves. Some people are sick from the motion, their fear, or both. The crew of the longboat, a mix of the pale-faced sailors and African collaborators, shout and strike out at anyone who doesn't move fast enough. As the longboat pulls away from the shore, you look back. The beach, the stone fortress, the green line of the coast, it is all shrinking, receding with every pull of the oars. This is your last sight of your homeland. Historians still debate the psychological impact of this moment. Was there a sense of finality, a conscious understanding that this was the last time they would ever see Africa? Was the immediate terror and confusion so overwhelming that there was no room for such a profound realization for you? The feeling is a cold, hollowing emptiness. The world you knew is disappearing, and you are being rowed toward a wooden monster that will swallow you whole. The longboat crashes against the side of the massive ship, the impact a jarring thud that resonates through your bones. Above you, a cargo net is lowered, a coarse, heavy web of rope. This is how you will be brought aboard. There is no gangplank, no ladder, nothing that suggests a human passage. You are cargo, and you will be loaded as such. The sailors in the longboat begin grabbing people, shoving you and your chained partner into the net. You are piled in with a half-dozen others, a tangled mass of limbs and chains. The net is drawn up, swinging wildly as it's winched aboard. For a moment, you are suspended between the heaving sea and the wooden wall of the ship, spinning slowly. You see the faces of the sailors on the deck above, looking down with a mixture of indifference and impatience. They see this every day. It's just another piece of the job. You are unceremoniously dumped onto the main deck. The impact on the hard wooden planks is brutal, knocking the wind out of you. The deck is a scene of controlled chaos. Sailors are shouting orders in their harsh language. The ship's officers, distinguished by their slightly better clothing and air of authority, oversee the operation. The air smells of tar, salt, and something else, a faint but deeply unsettling odor drifting up from below deck. It's the smell of the ship's accumulated misery. The first thing you notice about the crew is their sheer otherness. It's not just their pale skin, often burned raw by the sun, or their strange hair colors blonde, red, brown. It's their movements, their demeanor. They're hardened men, their faces etched by sea and sun. A little-known fact is that the mortality rate for the crew on a slaving voyage was also incredibly high, sometimes reaching 20-25%. They died from the same diseases that ravaged the captives in the hold: dysentery, smallpox, as well as from malnutrition, accidents, and violence. This didn't make them compassionate, if anything. It made them more brutal, more desperate to complete the voyage and get their pay. They were not jailers in a stone prison. They were wrapped on this floating vessel with their cargo, surrounded by death and disease. You and the other newly arrived captives are kept in a separate area of the deck, waiting for the loading process to be complete. This is your first moment to really observe the ship. It is a world of wood, rope, and canvas. The scale of it is still disorienting. The mast towers above you like a dead tree. The web of rigging is a complex puzzle against the sky. The deck is cluttered with barrels, crates, and coiled ropes, and at the center of the ship you see a grated hatchway leading down into the darkness of the hold. This is the source of the terrible smell. Before being sent below, there is another round of processing. You might be stripped naked again if you weren't already. Any remaining purse and items, a small bead, a strip of cloth that somehow survived the journey are taken away. This is the final erasure of your identity. You are being reduced to your most basic from a body to be stored. The captain or the first mate might review the paperwork from the slave castle, a ledger that lists the number of men, women, and children purchased. Historians still argue over the level of direct involvement captains and ship owners had in the selection process. Were they simply fulfilling an order for a certain number of units, or did they have specific preferences for age, gender, or ethnicity based on the demands of the colonies they were sailing to? Evidence suggests the latter. A prime male was the most valuable commodity, but women and children were also part of this horrific calculus, purchased for different reasons. The sun begins to set. The last longboat has arrived. The final tally is made. The crew starts to prepare the ship for departure. The grated hatchway to the hold is opened. A wave of foul, hot air, thick with the stench of human waste and despair, washes over the deck. It's a smell so potent it makes you gag. The guards begin to move, prodding you and the others with their whips and clubs toward that dark, waiting maw. This is it. You are about to descend into the belly of the beast. The shouting intensifies. You are pushed forward, stumbling in your heavy shackles, toward the ladder that leads down into the suffocating darkness below. The sky above you is a brilliant tapestry of orange and purple. The last sunset you will see is a person standing on the solid ground of the known world. The ladder leading down into the hold is steep and narrow. You are forced down one by one, your movements clumsy and slow due to the shackles. The moment you descend below the main deck, the world changes completely. The open air, the sky, the sounds of the sea, they are all gone, replaced by a low silencing, suffocating darkness. The space is impossibly small. The tween deck, as it was called, was specifically designed for this purpose. It's a space perhaps only 4 or 5 feet high, meaning an adult man cannot stand upright. You are forced to crouch to crawl, your back scraping against the rough wooden beams of the deck above. The floor is made of rough, unfinished wooden planks with gaps between them that led to the bilge at the very bottom of the ship, a stinking soup of seawater, vomit, and waste. This is where the infamous tight pack method is put into practice. The goal is to fit the maximum number of bodies into this limited space. You are forced to lie down on the hard planks, shoulder to shoulder, leg to leg, with the strangers you are chained to. There is no room to turn, no space to stretch. You are arranged like spoons in a drawer, a practice grimly referred to as spoon-wise. Your body is pressed hard against the person next to you. There's sweat and warmth and fear becoming your own. But it gets worse. You are not just lying on the floor. Along the sides of the hold, there are wide, shelf-like platforms, also made of rough wood. These platforms run the length of the ship, creating a second layer of human storage. You might be forced onto one of these shelves, your head just inches from the ceiling beams. Or you might be on the floor level with the shelf above you, so close that the bodies of those lying on it are just a foot or two from your face. The weight of their bodies makes the shelf sag. The wood creak and groan. Once you are in place, the final restraints are applied. The chain that connects your ankle to another person's is often stapled directly to the floor or the wall of the ship. You are now literally a fixture of the vessel, as much a part of its structure as the wooden beams and iron nails. You cannot roll over. Your world is now reduced to the few square feet of planking you occupy. The person next to you is so close you can feel their every breath, their every tremor. The darkness is almost absolute, broken only by the faintest slivers of light coming through the gratings on the main deck far above. It's a chilling historical detail that ship captains and surgeons would have detailed diagrams illustrating how to pack human beings for maximum efficiency. These weren't crude sketches, they were calculated, geometric plans, like the infamous diagram of the ship Brooks, which showed over 450 figures arranged in this horrificously logical manner. The debate at the time, particularly among abolitionists who used these diagrams as propaganda, was whether the tight pack was more or less profitable than a loose pack. Historians still analyze the grim calculus. A tight pack meant more potential survivors, even with a higher mortality rate, while a loose pack might have a lower death rate but transport fewer people overall. For the ship's investors, it was a question of pure, heartless mathematics. The hold is divided by gender and age. The men are typically kept in the main hold, while women and children are often in a separate, though equally crowded, compartment. This segregation was not done out of any sense of decency, but for control. The crew feared the men, who were seen as the biggest threat for rebellion. The hatch is closed. The faint light from above is extinguished, plunging you into a profound, suffocating blackness. The air, already foul, becomes immediately thicker, heavier. The heat from hundreds of packed bodies begins to build, turning the hold into a sweltering, oxygen-deprived oven. The only sounds are the creaking of the ship's timbers, the gentle slosh of the bilge water below, and the sounds of human misery, the clinking of chains, the soft groans of despair, and the terrified, heavy breathing of hundreds of people trapped in the dark. You lie there, pinned by the weight of your own body and the bodies around you, a prisoner in a wooden box, adrift on an endless sea. This is your new reality, and the journey has only just begun. The first night in the hold is a descent into a new kind of hell, a sensory nightmare that words can barely capture. You lie there, shackled to the rough wooden planks, and your mind tries to make sense of the inputs, but it's all too much. The darkness is the first thing. It's not just the absence of light, it's a physical presence. It's a thick, heavy blanket that smothers you. You can't see the person next to you, whose leg is chained to yours. You can't see the low ceiling just inches above your face. You can't see your own hands. This total blindness erases the world, leaving you adrift in a sea of pure sensation. It strips away the last vestiges of orientation, making you feel untethered from reality itself. Then there are the sounds. The ship has a voice, and you are inside its belly. It's a constant symphony of groans and creaks as the wooden timbers strain against the motion of the water. The rhythmic slosh of the waves against the hull is a constant, mocking reminder of the endless ocean that surrounds you. Below the floorboards, you can hear the foul bilge water washing back and forth. Its movement, the nauseating counterpoint to the ship's rocking. But the most terrible sounds are the human ones. The hold is a living thing, and its breath is the sound of suffering. There's the constant, low-level clinking of hundreds of chains, a metallic rustle that accompanies every small movement. There are moans of pain from bodies already bruised and sore. There are muffled cries of terror and despair. Someone near you is weeping, a quiet, hopeless sound. Someone else is praying or chanting in a language you don't understand, their voice a fragile thread in the oppressive darkness. And then the smell. The stench you noticed on deck is 1,000 times worse down here. It's a complex, horrifying cocktail that assaults your senses and lodges itself in the back of your throat. There's the sharp, acrid smell of unwashed bodies, hundreds of them, packed together in the sweltering heat. There's the metallic tang of fierce sweat. And, most overpoweringly, there is the smell of human waste. There is no sanitation. Large buckets, or tubs, are placed in the hold, but they are impossible for most to reach. they quickly overflow. The floor becomes a slick, stinking morass of excrement and vomit. The air becomes thick with the fumes of ammonia and dysentery. It is the smell of disease. It is the smell of death. The motion of the ship is relentless. It's not a gentle rocking, it's an unpredictable, nauseating sway. The ship rises on a wave and then plunges into a trough, a stomach-lurching drop that makes you feel weightless for a terrifying second. It rolls from side to side, and because you are shackled down, your body is dragged with it. The rough planks scrape against your back, your elbows, your hips, rubbing your skin raw. This constant chafing will soon create open sores, which will then become infected in the filth. Cis insques is immediate and universal. The sounds of violent retching echo through the darkness. There is no escape from the vomit of your neighbors, no way to clean yourself. You are forced to lie in it. Historians continue to debate the full psychological impact of this initial 24-hour period. Some theories suggest that the sheer sensory overload was a deliberate to love control, a shock and tactic designed to break the spirit of the captives from the very beginning, to crush any will to resist before it could even form. Others argue it was simply the consequence of a system that prioritized profit over human life to an absolute degree. The ship was a machine for transporting bodies, and the comfort or sanity of those bodies was not a factor in its design. A little known but horrifying detail is the presence of vermin. The hold, with its filth and darkness, was a paradise for rats, lice, and cockroaches. You feel them crawling over your skin in the dark, their tiny legs a constant, maddening irritation. The rats, bold and large, would scurry across bodies, sometimes even biting. It was another layer of torment, another small horror in the overwhelming darkness. Sometime during that long night, you feel a subtle change in the ship's motion, a deeper, more rhythmic vibration. The anchor has been raised. The sails have caught the wind. The ship is moving, leaving the coast of Africa behind, heading out into the open Atlantic. You are truly at sea now. There is no going back. The finality of this realization is a cold weight in your chest, heavier than any iron shackle. You lie there, listening to the symphony of suffering, and wonder what dawn will bring, or if you will ever see the light of day again. After what feels like an eternity in the suffocating darkness, a sliver of hope arrives in the form of noise from above. You hear the heavy wooden gratings being dragged open. A cascade of gray, morning light filters down into the hold, not enough to illuminate the whole space, but enough to turn the absolute blackness into a murky gloom. The fresh sea air that follows is a momentary, shocking relief, the gasp of life in a place of death. But this is not an act of mercy, a calculated effort to keep the cargo alive. The sailors appear at the hatchway, their silhouettes framed against the sky. They shout commands. The process of bringing the captives up to the deck begins. It's a slow, agonizing procedure. You are unshackled from the floor, but still chained to your partner. You have to crawl over other bodies to get to the ladder, your limbs stiff and aching, your skin raw and sore. The filth you've been lying in clings to you. Emerging onto the main deck is a shock to the system. The bright sunlight is blinding, searing your eyes after the long hours of darkness. The fresh air, which smelled so sweet from below, is now just the normal, salty sea breeze, but it feels like the purest thing you've ever breathed. You are herded by the crew who use rope's ends and small whips, the infamous cat o' nine tails, to enforce speed and order. Any hesitation is met with a sharp sting of pain. You are brought to the bar rickety, a high, thick wooden wall that separates the main deck. This wall, often topped with spikes, was designed to separate the male captives from the ship's crew in the quarterdeck, where the officers commanded the ship. It was a security measure, a fortress within the floating prison, meant to prevent a coordinated uprising. Here on the open deck, you are forced to dance. This was dancing for joy or celebration. It was a grotesque parody of it, a mandatory first exercise. The sailors, perhaps one of them playing a fiddle or a horn, would strike up a crude, rhythmic tune. You and the other captives are ordered to jump, to move, to wave your arms. It was called dancing the slaves. If you refuse, or if your movements are too sluggish from exhaustion and despair, a crewman will not hesitate to use the whip, lashing at your legs and back to make you jump. The sight is surreal. Hundreds of naked, shackled men, their bodies covered in filth and sores, being forced to leap and shuffle on the deck of a ship in the middle of the ocean, all to the tune of a sailor's jig. The purpose of this ritual was twofold, and brutally pragmatic. First, it was to give your muscles, which had been cramped and immobile for hours, some exercise. Atrophy was a threat to the value of the cargo. The ship's surgeon knew that some basic level of physical activity was necessary to prevent muscles from seizing up completely. Second, and more cynically, it was an attempt to counter the profound depression or melancholy that a surgeon might note in his log. They believed that forcing the body to move could somehow prevent the spirit from giving up entirely. A captive who succumbed to despair and refused to eat was a financial loss. It's a strange and disturbing footnote in the history of medicine that ship's surgeons on slavers kept meticulous, if dispassionate, logs. They recorded deaths, outbreaks of disease, and the general health of the cargo. They weren't there to provide comfort or healing in the modern sense. Their job was to minimize mortality, to ensure as many units as possible reached the Americas in a sellable condition. Their medical knowledge was used not to alleviate suffering, but to preserve the asset. During this time on deck, the crew would also perform another vital task: cleaning the hold. Buckets of seawater would be sloshed down into the now empty space to wash away the accumulated filth from the night before. It was a cursory, insufficient cleaning that did little to sterilize the environment, but it was better than nothing. Historians still debate the effectiveness of these measures. While it was a standard practice, the sheer scale of the problem meant the hold remained a breeding ground for bacteria and disease, regardless of these daily rinses. After an hour or two of this forced exercise under the hot sun, the routine is over. Your brief exposure to the open air is finished. You are forced to line up once more and descend back down the ladder, back into the stinking, semi-darkness of the hold. The gratings are closed. The gloom returns. You are shackled back into your designated spot on the rough planks, back into the suffocating heat and the overpowering stench. The brief respite of sunlight and fresh air makes the return to the hold even more unbearable. You now know what you are missing, and you know you will have to endure another long, black night before you see it again. Twice a day, a new ritual breaks the monotony of suffering. It is time for feeding. This process, like everything else on the ship, is not about nourishment or comfort, it's about fuel. It's the minimum input required to keep the human machinery from breaking down completely. The process begins with the now familiar sounds from above the opening of the hatch, the shouting of the crew. But this time, instead of being brought up on deck, the food is brought down to you. Sailors descend into the murky hold, carrying large wooden buckets or tubs filled with a steaming, unappetizing mush. The primary food served is a testament to cheap, high-energy provisions. Most commonly, it's boiled yams, horse beans, fava beans, or rice. These would be boiled into a thick, bland porridge, often with a small amount of palm oil mixed in for calories. The quality is abysmal. The beans are often infested with weevils, and the whole mixture is cooked in the same huge copper vats used for boiling water or rendering blubber on a whaling ship. The taste is bland at best, and often sour or spoiled. You are not given a bowl or a plate. The food is scooped out of the large tubs and into smaller, communal wooden bowls, which are shared between groups of about 10 people. You and the others you are chained with must huddle together, reaching into the same bowl with your hands. The etiquette of your former life is a distant memory. This is a desperate, competitive act. You grab what you can, as fast as you can, shoving the pulpy handfuls into your mouth. The stronger and healthier captives might get more, while the weak or sick get pushed aside, receiving little to nothing. The act of eating itself is a challenge. The constant, nauseating roll of the ship makes it difficult to coordinate your movements. The stench of the hold kills any appetite you might have had. Your body, racked with seasonskis, often rejects the food as soon as you swallow it. The sounds of retching and vomiting are a constant accompaniment to the meal. Refusing to eat is not an option. As mentioned, a captive who succumbs to despair and starves themselves is a direct financial loss. The crew monitors the feeding process closely. If someone is seen refusing food, the response is swift and brutal. Sometimes a sailor would use a whip to force compliance. In more extreme cases, they would use a horrific device called the speculum, or a more mouth opener, scissor-like instrument that could be inserted into a closed mouth and then forced open with a thumbscrew, allowing the crew to funnel the gruel down the person's throat. This was not about saving a life, it was about protecting an investment. A surprisingly complex aspect of the slavers' logistics was provisioning for the cargo. Captains had to calculate exactly how much food and water would be needed for a journey that could last anywhere from 1 to 3 months. They would purchase tons of yams, rice, and beans on the African coast before departure. Historians studying ship manifests have noted a grim irony. Sometimes the food purchased for the captives was of a higher nutritional quality, at least in its raw state, than the salted beef and hardtack that made up the crew's own diet. This wasn't out of concern for the captives' health, but because these African staples were cheaper and believed to be what the captives were accustomed to, thus making them more likely to eat. Another food you might encounter is slab ber sauce. This was a concoction made from palm oil, water, and a heavy dose of pepper. The species was intended not for flavor, but to stimulate the palate and encourage eating, and perhaps to mask the taste of spoiled food. It was also believed, incorrectly, to have medicinal properties that could ward off diseases like dysentery. After the meal, the communal bowls are collected. The sailors retreat. The hatch is sealed again. You are left in the darkness with a belly full of coarse, unsatisfying food, which often just adds to the discomfort and sickness. The brief flurry of activity is over. The sounds of the hold return to the familiar groans, cries, and the endless creaking of the ship. Hunger is a constant, gnawing presence on this voyage, but the act of eating is just another form of torment, another reminder of how completely you have been stripped of your humanity. You are no longer a person who shares a meal. You are a livestock being fattened at a trough in the sweltering, airless furnace of the hold. One need eclipses all others, the need for water. The heat generated by hundreds of packed bodies, combined with the tropical sun beating down on the deck above, creates an environment of extreme dehydration. Your mouth is perpetually dry, your lips cracked, your tongue feels swollen, and swallowing is a painful effort. The thirst is a physical entity, a tormenting demon that claws at your insides, dominating every waking thought. Like the food, the water is rationed with brutal precision. It is the most precious commodity on the ship, more valuable than the food because it is finite. The ship's large casks can only hold so much, and once it's gone, everyone, crew and captive alike, is doomed. The captain's calculations on this front are a matter of life and death for the entire voyage. The distribution of water is a highly controlled event, happening perhaps twice a day. A sailor brings a bucket and a single, small pinnick in a tin cup down into the hold. Each captive is allowed one small measure, a half pint or so. The sailor moves down the lines of shackled people, pouring the ration directly into your cupped hands or, if you are too weak, splashing it into your mouth. The moment is one of desperate, frantic anticipation. You watch the sailor approach, your entire being focused on that small cup. The water is often warm, stale, and tastes of the wooden cask it's been stored in for weeks. It might be cloudy with sediment, but it is wet. It is life. You gulp it down in a single, desperate swallow. The relief is immediate, but agonizingly brief. It's just enough to wet your tongue and throat, to momentarily quell the fire inside you, but it's nowhere near enough to quench the deep, cellular thirst of your body. A few minutes after the ration is gone, the maddening thirst returns, perhaps even stronger than before, sharpened by the memory of that fleeting moment of relief. This severe rationing leads to a state of chronic dehydration. Your head throbs constantly. You feel dizzy and weak. Your body, desperate for moisture, stops producing sweat and saliva. This dehydration is a major contributor to the diseases that run rampant in the hold. It weakens your immune system and makes you more susceptible to every infection. The scarcity of water creates a new kind of tension among the captives. The sound of someone else drinking is a form of torture. The fear that the sailor might miss you, or that the bucket will run dry before it reaches you, is a source of profound anxiety. It's a grimly practical detail that the water casks themselves were a source of disease. The wood could harbor bacteria, and the water, stagnant for weeks on end, could become a breeding ground for pathogens. Historians studying ship's logs sometimes find entries detailing the purification of water, which often involved adding vinegar or even small amounts of alcohol. This was less about killing germs, a concept they didn't fully understand, and more about improving the taste and smell, making the foul water more palatable. Whether these methods had any real effect is a subject of academic debate. The crew understood the power they wielded with the water ration. It was a tool of control, even more potent than the whip. A compliant captive got their ration. An uncooperative one might be denied water, a punishment so severe it was tantamount to a death sentence. The psychological toll of this constant thirst is immense. You begin to have fantasies about water. You remember the cool, clear streams of your homeland, the taste of rain, the simple act of submerging your head in a river. These memories, once comforting, are now a source of agony. You dream of water, only to wake up in the sweltering darkness with a mouth full of dust and a throat on fire. In this environment, rain becomes an object of fervent prayer. If a storm hits, the sound of rain rumming on the deck above is the most beautiful sound in the world. Sometimes, the gratings might be left open to let fresh air in, and with it, rain. The captives who could position themselves underneath would open their mouths to the sky, trying to catch a few precious drops. It is a desperate, primal act, a return to the most basic instinct for survival. But these moments are rare. There is only the heat, the darkness, and the all-consuming, unquenchable thirst. The hold is not just a prison, it is an incubator. All the elements are in place for a biological catastrophe: extreme overcrowding, lack of sanitation, malnutrition, dehydration, and a population of captives with already compromised immune systems from the trauma of capture and the march to the coast. In this environment, disease spreads with the speed and ferocity of a wildfire. The most common and feared affliction is dysentery, known on the ships as the bloody flux. It's caused by bacteria or amoebas, easily transmitted through contaminated food, water, and the filth that covers the floor. The symptoms are horrific: severe abdominal cramps, fever, and a violent, uncontrollable diarrhea that contains blood and mucus. In the confines of the hold, where you are shackled and unable to move, there is no containing it. It spreads from person to person with terrifying speed. The stench, already unbearable, becomes something else entirely: the smell of sickness and internal decay. Dehydration from the flux is rapid and severe, and for a body already starved of water, it is often a death sentence. You see it happen to the person next to you. First, the groans of pain. Then the fever, their skin hot to the touch. Then the sickness begins, and there is nothing either of you can do. You are chained to them, forced to lie in the evidence of their illness, knowing that it is only a matter of time before the same microscopic invaders enter your own body. Another terror of the Middle Passage is smallpox. While some populations in coastal Africa had developed a degree of immunity through prior contact, many people from the interior, like you, had never been exposed. For these virgin populations, the disease is devastating. It begins with fever and aches, then develops into the characteristic rash, which becomes fluid-filled pustules covering the entire body. It is incredibly contagious, spreading through the air. The ship's surgeon could do little but note its presence in his log. It's a point of ongoing academic discussion whether surgeons of the era practiced a crude form of inoculation, known as variola. This involved taking pus from a smallpox sore and introducing it into a healthy person's scratch. It was risky and could induce a full-blown case of the disease, but it had a lower mortality rate than contracting smallpox naturally. Historians debate how common this practice was on slave ships. Was it a calculated risk a surgeon might take early in the voyage to prevent a larger, more catastrophic outbreak later on? The evidence is sparse and inconclusive. For most captives, there was no such intervention. Beyond these two major killers, a host of other ailments thrive. Scurvy from a lack of vitamin C causes lethargy, bleeding gums, and open sores. Ophthalmia, a severe eye infection exacerbated by the filth and darkness, could lead to blindness. Skin diseases, from simple rashes caused by chafing the gall to virulent infections like yaws, are rampant. The open sores from shackles and the constant scraping against the rough planks become infected gateways for bacteria. The ship's surgeon, if there is one, is overwhelmed. His medical kit consists of little more than purgatives like mercury chloride, which often make things worse, some ointments, and tools for bloodletting, a common but ineffective practice for treating fever. His primary role is not to cure, but to identify the sick and, if possible, isolate them. A small section of the ship, perhaps a crudely partitioned area on deck, might be designated as a sick bay, but this is a token gesture. Once an epidemic like dysentery or smallpox takes hold below deck, isolation is almost impossible. A little known but poignant detail is the captives' own attempts at medicine. They would use traditional knowledge, if they had any, trying to treat symptoms with chants, prayers, or by using whatever materials they could find. A captive might try to clean a neighbor's wound with their own saliva or a scrap of cloth. These were small, desperate acts of humanity and healing in a place where both had been systematically erased. They were almost always futile against the overwhelming tide of infection. You live in constant fear, not just of the crew, but of the invisible enemies swirling in the air and filth around you. Every cough, every groan from a neighbor sends a spike of anxiety through you. You watch as people sicken and die, their bodies weakening day by day. You feel your own body, your own health, as a fragile, precarious thing, knowing that at any moment you could be next. The hold is a lottery of death, and the odds are not in your favor. The men who inflict this suffering upon you are, for the most part, ghosts. You hear them more than you see them. You hear the heavy, rhythmic thump of their boots on the deck above your head, a constant reminder of their freedom and your confinement. You hear their voices, a language that sounds like stones grinding together, shouting commands that dictate every aspect of your existence from eating to exercising. They are fleeting figures of authority, a face peering down through the grate, a silhouette wielding a whip on deck, a hand pouring your meager water ration. Who are these men from your perspective? They are demons, architects of this nightmare. But the reality is often more mundane, which is perhaps even more disturbing. The crew of a slave ship was not an elite naval force. They were often the cast-offs of Europe's bustling port cities. They were men fleeing debt, the law, or simply a life of grinding poverty. They were sailors who couldn't find a berth on a more respectable merchant or naval vessel. It was a dangerous, despised job, but it offered the promise of a payout at the end if you survived. They were hard men from hard places, their faces weathered by more than just the sun. Discipline on board was brutal, enforced by the captain and his officers with the same whips and fists used on the captives. Their food was barely better than yours, salted beef so tough it was called salt horse, and biscuits so hard they were known as hardtack. often infested with weevils. They lived in cramped, damp quarters, and they too were at the mercy of the sea and the ship's command. Here is a chilling, little-known fact that underscores the deadliness of the entire enterprise. The mortality rate among the crew was astonishingly high. On many voyages, between 15% and 25% of the sailors would die, succumbing to the very same diseases that ravaged the hold: the bloody flux, smallpox, and yellow fever. They were wrapped on this floating incubator of death, just as you were, separated only by a few feet of wooden planks. This shared risk did not foster solidarity, it bred a desperate, paranoid cruelty. A man living in constant fear of his own death is unlikely to show compassion for the suffering of others. His brutality is a function of his own terror. Historians and psychologists still debate what this environment did to a person's psyche. Did the slave trade attract men who were already predisposed to violence and cruelty, offering them a space where their worst impulses would be rewarded, or did the system itself create the monsters? The constant exposure to death, the need to enforce absolute control over hundreds of desperate people, the pervasive ideology that the captives were not human but cargo, all of this could corrode a person's soul, stripping away their empathy until only a callous shell remained. It's the ultimate question of nature versus nurture, played out on a floating wooden stage. You see the results of this corrosion every day. You see it in the casual indifference with which a sailor will kick a man who is too slow to move. You see it in the dispassionate way a whip is used not in anger, but as a simple tool of communication, like a farmer goading an ox. Their cruelty is not always hot-blooded. Often it is cold, methodical, and routine. This, somehow, is worse. It implies that your suffering is not even worthy of an emotional response. There is a hierarchy among them. The captain remains a distant, almost mythical figure of ultimate power. The ship's surgeon moves among you with a cold, clinical detachment, his ledger his only concern. The mates and boatswainess are the enforcers, their authority absolute, and the common sailors are the hands, carrying out the grim, daily tasks. But to you, chained in the darkness, these distinctions are meaningless. They are all they. They are the ones with the keys, the whips, the food, and the water. They are the arbiters of your pain and your survival. And in their eyes, you see not hatred, but something far more terrifying: a complete and utter absence of recognition. They look at you, but they do not see you. The system of the ship is designed not just to contain your body, but to break your mind. The endless darkness, the constant filth, the gnawing hunger, the ever-present threat of disease and violence, it's all a machine designed to grind down your spirit, to reduce you to a state of numb, passive despair. And for many, it works. The light in their eyes extinguishes. They become hollow shells, waiting for the end. But in the deepest part of that despair, a tiny, resilient timber can begin to glow. It's the refusal to be completely erased. It's resistance. It's not the kind of resistance with weapons and shouting. It's a silent, internal war waged against the overwhelming machinery of dehumanization. The most powerful and dangerous act of this silent rebellion is the refusal to eat. One day, when the slop-filled wooden bowl is pushed towards you, you turn your head away. It's a simple gesture, but its message is absolute. It is the one domain you still have control over: what passes your lips. It is a declaration that you will not be a willing participant in your own commodification. You will not be fattened for the market. The crew's reaction is not one of concern, but of anger. Your body is their investment, and you are threatening their profit margin. A sailor might shout, using a language you don't understand but a tone that is universal. He might try to force your mouth open. If the refusal persists, the speculum mora might be brought out. It's cold metal, a final violation. But even this is a battle. To force them to use this tool is to make them acknowledge your will, your defiance. Historians have long debated the motivation behind these hunger strikes. Were they acts of suicide, a desperate attempt to escape an unbearable reality. By choosing the time and manner of one's own death, or were they a calculated form of economic warfare by starving yourself, you were destroying their property. You were striking the only blow you could, hitting them in their ledger, where they were most vulnerable. It was an assertion that your life and your death belonged to you and you alone. But there are other, subtler forms of resistance, whispers of defiance in the suffocating dark. You begin to communicate. You are chained next to people whose languages are as foreign to you as the sailors. But humanity finds a way. A hand, in a rare moment of slack chain, might gently touch the arm of the person next to you in a gesture of shared suffering. A rhythmic tap on the wooden planks, a simple pattern, can become a signal, a way of saying I am here. A little known but powerful form of resistance was the preservation of culture through song. Not the loud, forced dancing on the deck, but soft, mournful songs sung in the depths of the hold. A low hum might start, a melody from a funeral dirge or a children's lullaby. Another voice might join in, then another. These were not songs of happiness, but of memory. They were a way of keeping the world you lost alive inside you. They were a way of reminding yourselves that you were once part of a family, a village, a culture. You were not just cargo. The sailors might hear it and try to stamp it out, but the melodies would just go softer, becoming a ghostly vibration in the dark, the sound they couldn't quite silence. You also resist by observing. You are a witness. Your mind, sharp and desperate, starts to work. You learn the rhythms of the ship. You learn to tell the time of day by the sounds from the deck above. You count the footsteps of the guards. You listen to the tones of their voices, trying to distinguish one sailor from another. You note which ones are more brutal, which ones are more careless. This is not idle observation. It is intelligence gathering. It is the mind refusing to shut down, refusing to accept helplessness. It is the mind preparing for an opportunity, however slim, that may never come. These acts of noiseless resistance do not change your physical reality. The chains are still cold and heavy. The air is still foul. The ship is still sailing further and further, further and further from your home. But they change your internal reality. They are a constant, silent declaration that you are still a human being. You can be chained, branded, and starved, but the core of you, your will, your memory, your spirit that is a fortress, they cannot so easily conquer. You are surrounded by people, packed so tightly together that their bodies are a constant, oppressive presence. Yet, you have never felt so alone. The hold is a twisted, floating version of the Tower of Babel. The men and women chained around you are from 100 different villages and a dozen different kingdoms. They speak languages that are as incomprehensible to you as the grunts and shouts of the European crew. This linguistic isolation is a powerful, if perhaps unintentional, to love control. A community cannot form without communication. A plan cannot be hatched. A simple word of comfort cannot be shared. The fear and despair that bubble inside you have no outlet. You hear the sounds of weeping, of prayer, of pained groans all around you, but they are just noise, a symphony of anonymous suffering. You cannot connect the sound to a story, to a person. The man you are shackled to, whose sweat you feel, whose every pained breath you hear, is a complete mystery. You don't know the name of his village. You don't know if he had a wife or children or parents who are now mourning his disappearance. He is simply a warm, trembling body, a shared weight on the chain that binds you both. The inability to say "Are you all right?" or "I am afraid to" creates a chasm of loneliness that is almost as unbearable as the physical torment. You try to communicate through gestures. They look in the murky gloom. A slight pressure of a hand, but these are crude, insufficient tools for conveying the complex terror of your situation. This wall of silence amplifies the fear. Is the man next to you from a rival tribe, an enemy in your old life you have no way of knowing? The ancient enmities and alliances of your homeland have been rendered meaningless, but the suspicion might still linger, another small poison in the toxic environment of the hold. Historians and linguists have found this to be a fascinating, if tragic, area of study. They call the mixing of different African ethnic and linguistic groups on a single ship the ethnic scramble. While some captains may have deliberately mixed groups to prevent communication and thus rebellion, others simply bought whomever was available at the slave castles. The debate continues: was this a deliberate strategy of divide and conquer, or simply a byproduct of the chaotic nature of the coastal trade? Either way, the effect was the same: it created an environment of profound alienation. Slowly, however, something remarkable begins to happen. In the crucible of the hold, a new language starts to form. It's not a formal language, but a pidgin, a crude and desperate form of communication born of necessity. It starts with single words. Someone might point to their chest and say their word for pain. Another might mime drinking and say their word for water. These basic nouns and verbs, drawn from a half-dozen different linguistic roots, become the first shared vocabulary. This is a little known but incredible testament to human resilience: the birth of Creole languages. Many of the Creole languages spoken today in the Caribbean and the Americas have their roots in this desperate attempt to communicate during the Middle Passage. Words from Yoruba, Igbo, Congo, and Dakin mixed with broken, simplified forms of English, Portuguese, or French from the sailors. It was a language forged in trauma, a hybrid tongue created syllable by syllable in the stinking darkness of the slave hold. You begin to pick it up. You learn the shared word for sailor, for whip, for sickness. The wall of silence begins to develop small cracks. For the first time, you can share the most basic information with the man you are chained to. You might learn the name of his people. He might learn yours. The small act of exchange is monumental. It pierces the isolation. It reestablishes a flicker of community. It transforms the anonymous body next to you back into a person. This new, broken language is a lifeline. It allows for the sharing of information which guard is the most brutal where the ship might be heading. It allows for the sharing of warnings if someone is gravely ill. And, most importantly, it allows for the possibility of coordinated action. The linguistic barrier was one of the crew's greatest assets. And now, word by word, you are beginning to tear it down. For days, the rhythm of the ship has been a monotonous, predictable roll. You've become accustomed to its nauseating sway, your body learning to anticipate the lurch and dip. But then, the rhythm changes. The movement becomes jerky, more violent. The groans of the ship's timbers deepen, taking on a higher, more strained pitch. The air, always thick and stagnant, seems to grow heavier, charged with a strange, electric pressure. Even in the darkness of the hold, you can feel that something is wrong. The sounds from the deck above change from routine thumping to frantic, panic scurrying. You hear shouting, not the usual commands, but urgent, strained cries whipped away by a rising wind that howls like a hungry animal. Then, the gratings above you are slammed shut and covered. The last vestiges of lightened air are extinguished. The crew has battened down the hatches. A tarpaulin is thrown over the grate and secured, sealing you in a truly airtight tomb. They are not doing this to punish you, they are doing it to save the ship. An open hatch in a storm is an invitation for a wave to swamp the vessel, sending it to the bottom in minutes. Plunged into absolute blackness and near total silence from the outside world, the internal chaos of the hold is magnified. The ship begins to pitch and buck like a wild beast. It's no longer a rhythmic rocking, you are being thrown from side to side. Your body, still shackled, is slammed against the wooden planks, then against the wooden planks, then against the person next to you. The darkness is filled with the sharp clang of chains, the thud of bodies hitting wood, and the terrified cries of hundreds of people who have no idea what is happening, only that it is violent and terrifying. The ship climbs a mountainous wave, a slow, agonizing ascent that feels like it will never end. The creaking of the hulless symphony of tortured wood. You feel a moment of sickening weightlessness at the peak, and then the ship plunges down the other side, a free fall that tears a gasp from your throat. Your stomach heaves. The sounds of vomiting fill the darkness below the floorboards. The bilge water is no longer sloshing, it's crashing back and forth, sometimes splashing up through the gaps, drenching you in cold, foul-smelling liquid. The air becomes unbreathable. With the hatches sealed, there is no ventilation. The heat from so many terrified bodies intensifies, and the limited oxygen is quickly consumed. You gasp for breath, but the air is a hot, wet blanket of carbon dioxide and the stench of waste and fear. People begin to panic in earnest, their cries turning to shrieks of suffocation. This was the captain's ultimate nightmare scenario, forcing a horrific choice. He knew that sealing the hatches for a prolonged period would cause mass casualties in the hold from asphyxiation. But keeping them open, even a crack, risked a catastrophic wave that could sink the ship, killing everyone, including the crew. Historians studying ship logs and captains' journals try to reconstruct this grim calculus. How did a captain decide how many minutes or hours could he keep the hold sealed before the loss of cargo from suffocation outweighed the risk of losing the entire ship? It was a life-or-death economic equation calculated in the heart of a hurricane. It's a chilling, often overlooked detail that many slave ships were simply lost at sea. They sailed from the coast of Africa and weren't ever seen again, vanishing without a trace, victims of storms, navigational errors, or other maritime disasters. They became ghost ships, their final, terrifying moments unrecorded, their human cargo disappearing into the depths of the Atlantic, their names simply struck from the ledgers of the trading companies. At the height of the storm, the ship gives a shudder so violent you are convinced it is breaking apart. A sound like 1,000 trees snapping at once echoes through the hull as a colossal wave crashes over the deck. The ship is thrown onto its side, and you, chained to the floor, are suddenly on a vertical wall. Bodies, chains, and loose buckets crash down from the shelves above, creating a cascade of horror in the darkness. This is it. This is the end. You are going to die in this dark, stinking box at the bottom of the ocean. But then, slowly, miraculously, the ship rights itself. The groaning continues, but it hasn't broken. After what feels like an eternity, the violent motion begins to lessen. The wild pitching softens back into a heavy, rolling swell. The howling of the wind subsides. The storm is passing. A long time later, you hear movement on the deck above. The tarpaulin is removed. A hatch is cracked open. A single beam of light pierces the darkness, and a torrent of fresh, clean, life-giving air pours into the hold. It's like being born again. But the light reveals the devastation. The hold is a wreck. There are bodies twisted in unnatural positions, people who work rushed or suffocated in the chaos. The storm outside may be over, but the storm inside has left a trail of death and deeper despair in its wake. The morning after the storm, the crew performs a grim but necessary task damage assessment. This doesn't mean checking the ship's rigging or patching the sails, it means taking inventory of the cargo. The hatches are thrown fully open, and sailors descend into the hold, not with food or water, but with an air of grim, methodical purpose. The light reveals the full horror of the previous night. The space is a chaotic jumble of bodies, some moving, some unnervingly still. The sailors move through the filth, their faces set in grim, dispassionate masks. They are here to separate the living from the dead. You watch as they approach him, then a few rows down. He is motionless, his eyes open and vacant. A sailor prods him with a foot. No response. He checks for a pulse or a breath. Nothing. The man is dead. The sailors work quickly. They use heavy hammers and chisels to knock the shackle off the dead man's ankle, freeing him from the living person he was chained to. The living captive, his face a mask of shock and terror, is then immediately shackled to another lone survivor. The grim arithmetic of the ship demands pairs. There can be no empty links in the chain. The process is repeated throughout the hold. Bodies are unshackled and dragged toward the ladder. It's not just those who died in the storm. It's the ones who succumbed to the bloody flux overnight, the ones who starved themselves into oblivion, the ones whose hearts simply gave out from fear and despair. Each body represents a financial loss, a name to be crossed off the ledger, a hit to the profit margin. There is no ceremony, no moment of respect. The dead are treated with the same rough efficiency as a spoiled barrel of salted beef. They are dragged up the ladder and onto the main deck. You and the other survivors are then brought up for your forced dance. But today, the ritual has a horrific new element. You are forced to witness what happens to the dead. The bodies are piled on the deck near the railing. The ship's surgeon or one of the mates might do a final check, just to be sure. There were anecdotal accounts, grimly recorded, of captives who were merely in a coma from sickness or exhaustion being mistaken for dead. Once confirmed, the bodies are simply thrown overboard. There is no prayer, no shroud. A sailor grabs the legs, another the arms, and with a grunt of effort, they swing the body over the side. It hits the water with a dull splash and is gone, quickly vanishing in the ship's churning wake. It's a particularly cruel detail that the crew sometimes had to dismember bodies to separate them. If a dead person was chained in a spoon-wise position, wedged tightly between two living captives, it was sometimes impossible to remove the body whole. In these horrific cases, the ship's surgeon would use a saw to cut off a limb, allowing the torso to be pulled free. This was a traumatic and horrifying event for everyone forced to witness it. This daily or sometimes hourly disposal of the dead was a powerful psychological weapon. It was a constant, visceral reminder of your own mortality and Dipso's ability. You were not seen as a person whose life had value. You were a commodity, and if you expired, you were waste to be discarded. This sight could break even the strongest spirit, reinforcing the idea that your life was utterly meaningless to your captors. Historians still debate the total number of people who died during the Middle Passage and were thrown into the Atlantic. The estimates are staggering, ranging from 1.5 to over 2 million souls. The entire route from the coast of Africa to the Americas became a vast, unmarked underwater graveyard. The ocean floor is littered with the remains of those who did not survive the journey. As you stand on the deck, forced to jump and move, you see the flash of a fin in the water behind the ship, then another. Then another. Sharks. They have learned that slave ships are a reliable source of food. A convoy of them follows the vessel, a constant, circling escort, waiting patiently for the next body to be tossed overboard. They are a living, swimming symbol of the ship's trail of death, a shadow that follows you all the way across the ocean. The journey stretches into an endless expanse of time. Weeks have passed since you last saw land, and your world has been reduced to the suffocating confines of the ship. The physical torments, the chains, the filth, the hunger, the thirst have become a constant, grinding reality. But now a new, more insidious enemy begins its assault, the slow decay of the mind. The body can endure a surprising amount of punishment, but the spirit is more fragile. You are trapped in a state of absolute uncertainty, and the mind abhors a vacuum. Where is this ship going? What will happen when it arrives? The stories you heard on the coast, whispered in the dungeons of the slave castle, were terrifying and fantastical. Some said the pale men were cannibals, that they were taking you to their land to be eaten. The sight of them eating their raid, salted meat, which looked like raw flesh, seemed to confirm this. Others said they used the blood of Africans to make a special raid dye for their cloths, or their bones to make gunpowder. These fears, born of terror and the unknown, fester in the darkness of the hold. With no information, the mind creates its own narratives, and they are always the worst possible scenarios. The psychological stress is immense. You are living in a state of suspended terror, a perpetual what if that erodes your sanity. This profound despair has a name. The ship's surgeons called it fixed melancholy. They would note it in their logs when a captive became completely unresponsive, refusing to eat or move, their eyes vacant. They saw it as a medical condition, a dangerous one, because it inevitably led to death and a loss of profit. Their treatment was the whip or the speculomorum, trying to beat the life back into a body that had already decided to die. Historians and psychologists now recognize this not as a simple melancholy, but as a profound psychological trauma, what we might today call acute PTSD, or a person facing what they perceive as an inescapable, hopeless situation literally loses the will to live. The mind gives up, and the body follows. The debate continues on how much the captors understood this phenomenon. Did they see it as a spiritual failing on the part of the captive, or did they have a grim, practical understanding that breaking a person's spirit would also break their body? You see this fixed melancholy take hold of the man chained beside you. He stops trying to communicate. He stops reacting to the prodding of the guards. He lies still, his breathing shallow. You are chained to a dying soul, and their despair is contagious, a cold fog that seeps into your own mind. The monotony is a form of torture in itself. Each day is an exact copy of the last. The dark hold, the forced dance on deck, the foul food, the meager water, the return to darkness. This endless, grinding repetition is designed to erase your sense of self. You are no longer a farmer, a craftsman, a father, or a son. You are a creature of the hold, your existence defined by this brutal, unchanging routine. Your memories of home start to feel thin, like a dream you are struggling to hold on to. The face of your mother, the smell of your village, the sound of your language, they begin to fade, washed out by the overwhelming reality of the ship. It's a little-known psychological detail that some captives would try to anchor their minds by creating rituals. They might scratch a mark on the wooden planks for each day that passed, a desperate attempt to impose order on the chaos. Others might recite genealogies in their minds, listing the names of their ancestors to remind themselves of who they were and where they came from. These were mental exercises in survival, a way to keep the inner flame from being completely extinguished by the suffocating darkness. Suicide becomes a rational, even desirable, choice. If an opportunity presents itself, many will take it. During the brief time on deck, someone might make a sudden, desperate dash for the railing, throwing themselves into the sea. This was the ultimate act of defiance. It was a declaration that a quick death in the ocean, a return to the embrace of the water goddess Yemenya for some West African beliefs, was preferable to the slow death in the hold and the unknown horrors that awaited at the destination. The crew would try to prevent it, not to save a life, but to save a piece of property. But sometimes, a captive was too quick, and for a brief, fleeting moment, they were free. The routine on deck continues, a grotesque parody of life. You are forced through the motions of the dance, your shackled feet pounding a hollow rhythm on the wooden planks. Your eyes, however, are no longer fixed on the crew or the miserable faces around you. They are drawn irresistibly to the water. It started subtly, a flash of movement in the ship's wake, something dark and sleek just beneath the surface. At first, you might have dismissed it as a trick of the light, or perhaps a curious dolphin. But you saw it again the next day, and the day after that. It wasn't just one. It was a silent, patient escort. Now, you see them clearly. The unmistakable triangular fin slicing through the blue water. Sometimes there are 2 or 3, sometimes a dozen gliding effortlessly in the churning water behind the ship. They are sharks. And they are not just passing by. They are following you. The horrifying realization connects in your mind with a cold, sickening click. You remember the sound of the splash every time a body was thrown overboard. You remember the men who, in a final act of desperate defiance, threw themselves into the sea. The sharks are not following the ship. They are following the trail of death that the ship leaves in its wake. They have learned that this floating wooden mountain is a source of food. This knowledge adds a new, primal layer of terror to your existence. You are not just trapped in a wooden box, you are being stalked by a pack of predators. The ocean, which once represented a terrifying, abstract void, now has a face. It is the cold, dead eye of a shark, The choice of suicide by jumping overboard is no longer a leap into a watery embrace, a potential return to the spirit world. It is a leap into a feeding frenzy. The captors have, in a way, outsourced their terror to the natural world. The crew is aware of the sharks. Of course they are. They see them every day. But their reaction is different. There is no fear in their eyes, only a kind of weary familiarity. They sometimes point them out, shouting and laughing. For them, the sharks are just part of the scenery of the voyage, like the seabirds or the sunsets. They are the sanitation crew, the grim janitors of the Middle Passage. Herein lies a chilling piece of maritime lore. A little-known fact from that era. The presence of sharks became so synonymous with slave ships that they became a navigational marker of sorts. A sailor on another vessel, a merchant ship, a naval frigate seeing a large school of sharks trailing a ship in the mid-Atlantic, would know its grim purpose without even needing to see its flag. The vessel was instantly identifiable by its shadow convoy of death. Yonder sails a slaver, they might say, the observation carrying a mixture of condemnation, fear, and a desire to keep their distance. The constant, visible presence of these predators has a profound effect on the morale in the hold. The story spreads through the newly forming pidgin language, through gestures and fearful glances. The sea monsters are waiting. It extinguishes one of the last remaining paths of escape, closing a mental door that had, for some, represented a final, desperate hope. Now, there is only the ship or the teeth. Historians and marine biologists today still discuss the ecological ramifications of the transatlantic slave trade. Did the centuries of this constant, predictable food source the bodies of an estimated 1 to 2 million people actually alter the behavior or migratory patterns of certain shark species in the Atlantic? Did it create a generational memory, drawing them to these shipping lanes? It's a haunting question, suggesting that the impact of this human atrocity might be written not just in our history books, but in the very instinct of the creatures of the deep. You watch them now from the deck, their dark shapes circling, patient, eternal. They are a perfect metaphor for your situation. They represent the inevitable, violent end that awaits so many. They are the final punctuation mark on a life that has been devalued to nothing. They are the last face you will see if you fall, if you give up. The sight of them is a new kind of chain, a psychological one, binding you ever tighter to the ship and the grim fate it carries you toward. The constant circling, the patient waiting, becomes a new part of the daily torture. Despair is a heavy, suffocating blanket, but sometimes, beneath it, the embers of resistance can be fanned into a flame. The shared pidgin language has been growing. The shared suffering has forged fragile bonds. The constant observation of the crew's routines has provided knowledge. A plan begins to form, whispered in the dark, passed from one person to the next through a chain of trust. It is the most dangerous thought one can have on this ship rebellion. The opportunity is always the same, the brief period on deck. That is the only time when you are out of the hold, when the crew is in sight, when there is a chance, however slim, to act. The plan is desperate and simple. Overpower the guards on deck, seize whatever weapons are at hand, a belaying pin, a piece of loose chain, a discarded tool, and fight. The goal is not necessarily to learn how to sail the ship to freedom for many from the interior. The ship is a terrifying mystery. The goal is simpler to kill the captors and die fighting, rather than to die slowly in the filth below. It is a choice for a warrior's death over a victim's. One morning, the signal is given. It could be a specific word, a cough, the prearranged movement. As you are being herded on deck, the plan explodes into action. A group of the strongest men, who have been maneuvering themselves into position, suddenly lunge at the handful of sailors guarding them. The deck, a moment before a scene of routine brutality, erupts into a whirlwind of desperate violence. The element of surprise is your only advantage. A sailor is pulled down, his cries of shock cut short. Another is struck with a shackle, the heavy iron a formidable weapon. For a few breathtaking moments, it seems possible. The captives, fueled by months of repressed rage and despair, fight with a ferocity that stuns the crew. But the ship is a machine of control, and it has layers of defense. The sailors on the quarterdeck, behind the safety of the barricade, are the first to react. The captain or first mate shouts orders. The initial shock gives way to a practiced, lethal response. They have trained for this. They have drilled for this. An alarm is sounded, a bell ringing frantically, a shot fired into the air from locked chests on the quarterdeck. They produce their ultimate weapons, firearms, muskets and pistols. The loud crack of gunpowder echoes over the deck, a sound of terrifying authority. A man at the forefront of the charge, a leader of the rebellion, falls to the deck, a blossom of red spreading on his chest. The sight of this distant, almost magical form of killing sends a wave of shock and hesitation through the ranks of the rebels. You have courage and rage, but they have technology. More crew members emerge from other parts of the ship, armed with cutlasses, pikes, and more guns. The fight becomes a one-sided slaughter. The crew forms a disciplined line, firing and reloading, or using their long pikes to keep the rebels at bay. The deck becomes slick with blood. The rebellion, which burned so brightly for a few moments, is extinguished with ruthless efficiency. The aftermath is even more terrible than the fight itself. The surviving leaders of the uprising are rounded up. They are not simply killed. An example must be made. The crew needs to re-establish its absolute authority, to terrorize the rest of the captives into submission so that no one will ever dare to try this again. The punishments are a spectacle of calculated cruelty, designed to be witnessed by everyone. A leader might be flogged to death, the cat-o'-nine-tails methodically tearing the flesh from their body over hours. Another might be hung from the yardarm, their body left to swing as a warning. Historians studying accounts of these uprisings, and there were many, at least one for every 10 voyages by some estimates, described even more horrific retaliations. There are verified reports of rebels being forced to eat the heart and liver of a dead comrade, a form of psychological warfare designed to completely shatter their humanity. The debate among historians is not whether these uprisings happened, but how often they were successful. While the vast majority were crushed, there are a few documented cases where the captives did manage to take control of the ship. However, their victory was almost always short-lived. Unsure how to navigate, they would either drift until they were recaptured, or the ship would be wrecked, dooming everyone aboard. The most famous example is the Amistad, but that was a coastal vessel, not a transatlantic one, and it remains a significant exception. For you, witnessing the brutal suppression of the revolt is a lesson written in blood. The hope that flickered for a moment is stamped out, replaced by a colder, harder despair. They have shown you the full extent of their power and their cruelty. They have shown you that resistance is futile. The ship sails on, the silence in the hold now heavier, thicker, and filled with the ghosts of the brave men who chose to fight. Weeks turn into months. The horizon has been an unbroken line of blue for so long that you've almost forgotten that land exists. The rhythms of the ship, once salient and terrifying, have become your entire reality. The daily horrors have dulled into a monotonous, grinding routine. But one morning, something is different. It's not a sight or a sound, but a smell. Carried on the sea breeze that filters down through the gratings is a new scent, faint but distinct. It's not the sharp, clean smell of salt and water. It's a loamy green and earthy smell. It's the smell of damp soil, of decaying leaves, of flowering plants. It is the smell of land. A quiet murmur spreads through the hold as others catch the scent. It's a sound of confusion, of cautious hope, of renewed fear. The journey is ending. But what does that mean? Is this the cannibal's island? Is this the land where they will turn your bones to dust? The terror of the unknown, which had been dulled by the daily grind, returns with a sharp, piercing intensity. On deck, the atmosphere among the crew has also changed. There's a new energy, a sense of purpose and anticipation. They are nearing their destination. For them, it means the end of a perilous voyage, the promise of port taverns, and, most importantly, their pay. Their work is almost done. A few days later, you hear the cry from the lookout high up on the mast land ho. The words mean nothing to you, but the celebratory tone is unmistakable. Later, when you are brought on deck, you see it. It's a faint, dark line on the horizon, a smudge between the sea and the sky. It is land, but it does not look like the home you remember. The color seems different, the shape of the coastline unfamiliar. It feels alien. This is the new world. It could be Barbados, Jamaica, Cuba, or the coast of Brazil or North America. To you, it is simply the other side. The ship does not sail directly to shore. The journey is almost over, but a new phase of the process is about to begin. This is the preparation for sail. The value of the cargo is determined by its physical condition. Basically, emaciated captive will fetch a much lower price than one who appears strong and healthy. The captain and surgeon now begin a grotesque and cynical process of window dressing. The routine changes. The food rations are increased. You might be given better quality food than you've had the entire voyage, more yams, perhaps even sun-salted fish or meat. The water ration becomes more generous. This is not an act of kindness. It's an attempt to fatten you up, to put some flesh back on your skeletal frame, to make you more appealing to a buyer. A particularly cruel part of this preparation was the use of palm oil. The crew would take tubs of the greasy, yellow oil and coat her entire body with it. They would rub it into your skin, your hair, everywhere. The purpose was to hide the evidence of the journey. The oil concealed the rashes, the sores, the gall from the chafing of the shackles. It gave your skin a deceptively healthy-looking sheen, masking the malnutrition and disease that lay just beneath the surface. It was like polishing a damaged piece of fruit to make it look fresh. Your mouth might be inspected again, your teeth cleaned. Men might have their heads shaved to get rid of lice and to create a look of uniformity. They might even be given a small scrap of cloth to wear, a loincloth to provide a modicum of decency for the upcoming auction. Historians studying this process call it the gauntlet of commodification. It's the final, intensive period where every effort is made to maximize the monetary value of the human goods. There's a continuous debate about the psychological effect of this sudden, deceptive shift in treatment. Did it provide a moment of relief, a false hope that things might get better, or was it simply another, more cynical form of violation to be starved and brutalized for months and then suddenly fed and oiled just before being sold? Would be a deeply disorienting and dehumanizing experience. You are being groomed like an animal for market. The crew, who for months have treated you with brutal indifference or outright hostility, now handle you with a strange kind of care a farmer gives his prize pig just before taking it to the fair. This sudden change is perhaps more unsettling than the consistent brutality. It reinforces, in the most profound way, that you are not a person. You are, and always have been, an object, an item of merchandise whose packaging is now being polished for the showroom floor. As the ship gets closer to the coastline, revealing a lush, green landscape so different from your homeland, a new anxiety settles over the crew. The ship doesn't make for the main port right away. Instead, it drops anchor in a quiet, secluded bay. A little distance from the bustling harbor you can now see in the distance. The journey is over, but your ordeal is not. This is a period of quarantine. The colonial authorities in the New World ports are terrified of the diseases the slave ships carry. An outbreak of smallpox or the bloody flux brought ashore could devastate the local population, both European and enslaved. Therefore, every slaver is subject to inspection before it can land its human cargo. A small boat approaches your ship, carrying a port official and a doctor. They are well-dressed men who hold handkerchiefs, often scented, to their noses as they come aboard. They wrinkle their faces in disgust at the overpowering stench of the ship, a stench that has been your entire world for months. The port doctor performs a cursory inspection. He might have a few of the captives brought before him, looking for the telltale signs of the most virulent diseases. The ship's captain, meanwhile, is doing everything he can to deceive the official. He presents a ship's log that has likely been doctored, underreporting the number of deaths from contagious diseases. The captives who are clearly unactively sick are hidden away, kept in the darkest corners of the hold, out of sight. The captain might offer a bribe, a common practice, to the official to speed the process along. It's a chilling bureaucratic detail that the ship's surgeon had to swear an oath to the port authorities. He had to formally declare that there was no reigning sickness on board. Historians studying these documents note the glaring discrepancy between the surgeon's official declarations and the private contents of their own logs. The pressure from the captain and the ship's investors to get the cargo to market quickly often outweighed any ethical or legal obligation to tell the truth. It was a system built on lies, from the very first capture to the final sale. During this quarantine period, which could last for a few days or even a week, the fattening up process continues. More food, more water, more of the greasy palm oil rubbed onto your skin. The crew works to erase the final traces of the middle passage. The hold is given its most thorough cleaning yet, with seawater and vinegar, to try and mask the smell of death that clings to its very timbers. This period of waiting is a strange, suspended limbo. You can see the new world. You can see the buildings of the port town, hear the faint sounds of church bells or wagons. It is so close yet completely inaccessible. You are trapped in the same floating prison, but now with the tantalizing, terrifying sight of your final destination just out of reach. For the captives, this time allows for new fears to grow. You can see the activity in the main harbor. You see other ships. You see people moving on the docks. They are all strangers. The new landscape is intimidating. The trees, the birds, the very color of the soil seems wrong. This is not just a new place, it's a new universe, and you have no idea what your place in it will be. A little-known aspect of this quarantine period was its use for seasoning. This was a brutal concept where newly arrived Africans were sometimes held in these quarantine camps or pest houses on shore. The idea was to acclimate them to the new disease environment, the new climate, and the new food of the Americas before they were sent to the plantations. It was a period of high mortality, weeding out the weak before they were sold. It is a floating version of one of these camps. The crew is essentially waiting to see who might die in the final few days before the sale. A captive who dies on the ship is the captain's loss. A captive who dies a week after being sold is the new owner's loss. Finally, the word comes. The quarantine is lifted. The ship has been cleared for entry. The anchor is raised for the last time. The sails are unfurled, and the ship slowly, majestically, moves out of the quiet bay and toward the main harbor. The crew is jubilant. Your journey across the ocean is officially over. But as you look at the crowded docks, at the faces of the strange, pale men waiting there, you feel a cold red creep into your heart. You have survived the middle passage, but you are about to enter the new circle of hell. Sailing into the main harbor is a jarring, overwhelming experience. After months of seeing nothing but water, wood, and a few dozen faces, the sudden explosion of sensory information is staggering. The port is a hive of activity. Dozens of other ships, with their towering masts and complex rigging, are docked side by side. The docks themselves are a chaotic swarm of people, sailors, merchants in their fine coats, soldiers in uniform, and other enslaved people, dressed in coarse linen, moving heavy barrels and crates. The sounds are a cacophony, the shouting of orders, the rumble of wagon wheels on cobblestones, the clanging of blacksmiths' hammers, and a babble of languages you don't understand. The smells are just as intense, the familiar tar and salt water mixed with the unfamiliar scents of cured tobacco, raw sugar, animal manure, and coal smoke. It's the smell of commerce, of a world built on labor and trade. Your ship finds its berth, and the crew secures it to the dock with thick, heavy ropes. The voyage is done, but you are not immediately taken off. The buyers need to be informed. An announcement is made, perhaps a notice posted in the town square or an advertisement placed in the local newspaper, declaring the arrival of a new shipment of prime Gold Coast Negroes, or healthy Windward Coast Africans, ready for sale. There are two main methods of sale. The first is the auction. The second, and often more chaotic, is the scramble. If the sale is to be a scramble, the process is terrifyingly swift. A fixed price is set for each man, woman, and child. Their overseers or agents gather on the dock, waiting for a signal. When a gun is fired or a drum is beat, they scramble aboard the ship, rushing in to grab the captives they want. It is a frenzied, violent spectacle. You are standing on the deck, naked or nearly so, coated in oil, when suddenly a mob of strange men bursts upon you. They are shouting, shoving, grabbing. A buyer might tie a handkerchief around your arm to claim you. Another might use a piece of string or a small rope. You are inspected again, but this time with a rough, proprietary haste. Hands pinch your flesh, force your mouth open, check your limbs. It is a chaotic melee, with buyers fighting over the best specimens. Families or people who manage to form bonds on the ship are torn apart in an instant, claim different directions. The terror and confusion are absolute. Within minutes, it's all over. You have been claimed. You belong to someone. The alternative is the auction, a more orderly but no less dehumanizing process. You are taken off the ship and marched through the streets of the port town to a slave market or a public square. This is a terrifying walk. You are exposed, vulnerable, and object of intense curiosity, pity, or scorn from the townspeople who line the streets to watch the procession. The auction block is a raised platform, designed so that everyone can see the product. You are brought up, one by one or in small groups. You stand there, exposed to the gaze of hundreds of potential buyers. The auctioneer, a man with a loud voice and a fast-talking patter, begins the sale. He describes you as if you were a horse or a piece of furniture. A strong buck, prime field hand, good teeth, no signs of sickness. Will start the bidding at £40. The buyers, a collection of grim-faced men in hats, raise a finger, nod their head, call out their bids. The price goes up. The auctioneer's voice rises with it. You have no idea what the words or numbers mean, but you understand the transaction. Your life, your future, your body, it is all being sold to the highest bidder. You look out at the sea of pale, impassive faces, and you feel a profound sense of alienation. You are an object on display, your worth being calculated in a currency you do not comprehend for a purpose you cannot imagine. Finally, the gavel falls. Sold to Mr. Smith of the Green River Plantation. The auctioneer points to a man in the crowd. That man is now your master. You are laid off the block, your ownership transferred. The brand on your skin from the slave castle told you who you belonged to then. Now, you belong to someone new. Historians still debate which method, the scramble or the auction, was more psychologically damaging. The scramble was a moment of pure, violent chaos. The auction was a slower, more deliberate process of public humiliation. Both served the same function: the final, legal, and public transformation of a human being into a piece of property. A little known and heartbreaking detail is that some buyers specifically sought out people from the same ethnic group, believing them to be better suited for certain types of work. A planter might seek out co-Romanese Aiken people from the Gold Coast for their reputation as skilled agriculturalists, despite also fearing them for their reputation for rebellion. This meant that sometimes people from your region, people you might even know, would end up on the same plantation. This could be a source of comfort, but also a way for planters to use existing social structures to their advantage. You are handed over to your new owner, or his overseer, the last link to the ship. Your floating prison for these past months is broken. A rope is tied around your neck, and you are led away, part of a new chain, heading out of the city and into the countryside, toward a place called a plantation. The next chapter of your nightmare is about to begin. The walk from the port city to the plantation is a journey into another world. The chaotic energy of the docks gives way to dusty roads that wind through a landscape of startling, unfamiliar green. The trees are different, the birdsong is alien, and the air itself feels thicker, heavier with the scent of tropical blossoms and damp earth. You are part of a small, sad procession, a line of newly purchased people, tied together by ropes and prodded along by an overseer on horseback. The overseer is a new kind of captor. He is not a sailor. His skin is burned a deep, angry red by the sun, and his eyes are hardened watchful. He speaks the same clipped, for language as the sailors, but with a different accent, a different rhythm. He is the face of your new life. After hours of walking, you arrive. You see it first as a clearing in the endless green vast, manicured fields stretching to the horizon, planted with a crop you have never seen before. It could be the tall, swaying stalks of sugarcane, the low, bushy shrubs of cotton, or the broad, leafy plants of tobacco. This is the source of the wealth that paid for your journey, that paid for the ship, that paid for you. At the center of it all is a collection of buildings. There is one large, elegant house, often painted white, with columns and wide porches. It sits on a hill, looking down on everything else. This is the great house, the home of the master. Then, further down, there is a cluster of smaller, cruder buildings, workshops, storage barns, and a collection of small windowless shacks. These are the slave quarters. This is your new home. The plantation is a self-contained universe, an agricultural factory powered by human bodies. It has its own strict hierarchy, its own laws, and its own brutal logic. At the top is the master, a figure who may be a constant presence or an absentee and lord you rarely see. Below him is the overseer, the man responsible for the day-to-day operations and for extracting the maximum amount of labor from the enslaved population. Below him might be drivers, who were themselves enslaved people, chosen for their strength or loyalty and given the authority and the whip to supervise the field hands. You are brought to the slave quarters and assigned a shack. It is a tiny dirt-floored hut, perhaps made of rough-hewn wood or wattle and daub. It might be empty, or you might be forced to share it with several other people, strangers who were purchased at different times from different ships. There is no privacy, no comfort. A rough blanket and a wooden plank for a bed might be all that is provided. This is the beginning of a new, systematic process of dehumanization, different from the acute terror of the Middle Passage but just as insidious. It is called seasoning period, which could last up to 2 or 3 years, is to break you. It is to strip away your African identity and remake you into a compliant, productive slave. The first step is a new name. Your own name, the one given to you by your parents, is a link to your past, to your lineage, to your identity. That is taken from you. You are given a new, generic name by the master, a classical name like Caesar or Pompey, a common English name like Tom or Joe, or perhaps even a joke name. This renaming is an act of power, a declaration that even your identity is now his property. Next comes the language. You are forbidden to speak your native tongue. You are forced to learn a crude, simplified version of the master's language, what would become plantation Creole. This is the language of commands: work, hurry, stop. It is a language designed not for communication, but for control. Finally, you are taught your job. You are shown the strange plants and the tools used to cultivate them, the heavy hoe, the sharp machete. You are forced to work from sunup to sundown, a relentless, back-breaking labor that you are completely unaccustomed to. The heat is suffocating. The work is monotonous and painful. Any sign of slowness, confusion, or resistance is met with the whip. The overseer or the driver is always watching, their whip a constant symbol of their authority. Historians fiercely debate the success rate of the seasoning process. While it was designed to create an docile workforce, it often failed. The mortality rate during this period was incredibly high. Many newly arrived Africans died from disease, malnutrition, overwork, or simply from the profound psychological shock of their new reality. A lesser-known fact is that this was a calculated loss. Planters knew a certain percentage of their new stock would not survive seasoning, and they factored this into their business model. It was cheaper to buy a new captive from a ship than to raise one from birth. You have survived the march to the coast. You have survived the march to the coast. You have survived the Middle Passage. And now you find yourself in a new, strange land, stripped of your name, your language, and your freedom, facing a life of unending, brutal labor. The voyage has ended, but the journey into bondage has just begun. The first morning begins not with the sun, but with a sound. A harsh alien clang of a bell or the long, mournful cry of a horn cuts through the pre-dawn gloom. It's a sound that demands instant obedience. There is no gentle waking, no stretching as the sunlight filters through the thatch of your old home. There is only the command of the bell and the immediate scramble to move. You are herded out of the small, dark shack into the damp, cool air. All around you, other figures are emerging from identical huts, their faces cast in shadow, their movements slow with a weariness that sleep has not cured. You are formed into a line, a gang. This is the gang system, a method of organizing labor that treats people like a single, multi-limbed machine. At the head of your gang is the driver. He might be one of the few who survived the seasoning process, a man whose spirit has been bent or broken into the shape the master requires. He holds a long, plated leather whip. It rests casually in his hand, but its presence is a constant, unspoken threat. He leads you out, past the great house where the master still sleeps, and into the fields. The sun is just beginning to rise, painting the eastern sky in soft shades of pink and orange. In your old life, this was a beautiful, hopeful moment. Here, it is simply the signal that the long, grueling day of labor has begun. You are handed a tool, a heavy, clumsy hoe, heavier than any you have ever used. Your task is to weed the rows of the strange crop, to clear the ground around the base of each plant. The work is agonizing. Your body, already weakened by the long voyage and poor nutrition, screams in protest. Your back, unaccustomed to being bent for hours on end, aches with a deep, burning pain. The muscles in your arms and shoulders tremble with the effort of lifting and swinging the heavy hoe. Your hands, soft from months of inactivity in the hold, quickly blister. The blisters break, and the raw skin grinds against the rough wood of the handle. The driver walks the lines, his eyes missing nothing. If someone slows down, if their posture sags, if they pause for even a moment to stretch their aching back, the air cracks. The sound of the whip is sharp and loud, a sudden explosion of noise that makes everyone flinch. You see it land on the back of a woman a few rows down. She cries out, a sharp intake of breath, but she does not stop working. Her hoe continues to rise and fall. This is your first and most important lesson. Pain is not an excuse to stop. The work is all that matters. Historians still debate the extent to which planters, while publicly denigrating African intelligence, privately recognized and exploited the sophisticated agricultural knowledge the captives brought with them. You might have been a master of crop rotation, of irrigation, of understanding the subtle language of the soil in your homeland. Here, that knowledge is worthless. You are not a farmer, you are a motor, a pair of hands to perform a single, repetitive task dictated by the overseer. Your mind is not required, only your body. The sun climbs higher, becoming a merciless, white-hot disk in the sky. There is no shade, no relief. Sweat pours down your face, stinging your eyes and dripping from your chin. Thirst, the old enemy from the ship, returns with a vengeance. A water carrier, often a child or an elderly person, moves through the rows with a bucket and a gourd, but the ration is small, just enough to keep you from collapsing. You work until the sun is directly overhead. There is a brief pause for a midday meal. It is not a moment of rest and community. It is a lump of cold corn mush, perhaps with a small piece of salted fish, eaten quickly in the field. Then the bell or the horn sounds again, and the work resumes. It's a lesser-known detail that not all plantations operated on this sun-up to sundown gang system. In some places, particularly the rice plantations of South Carolina, a task system was used. An individual was assigned a specific task for the day to clear a certain area, for example. Once the task was complete, their time was their own. This system, while still brutal, allowed for a small degree of autonomy and the ability to cultivate a personal garden. For you, in this sugarcane or cotton field, there is no such sliver of freedom. Your time belongs entirely to the master. The afternoon wears on, an eternity of heat, pain, and exhaustion. Finally, as the sun once again touches the horizon, casting long shadows across the fields, the horn sounds for the last time. The day is over. You stumble back to the quarters, your body a single, throbbing ache. You are given your evening ration, more cornmeal, perhaps a weekly portion of salt pork. You collapse in your shack, but sleep does not come easy. Your mind replays the horrors of the day, the crack of the whip, the aching of your muscles, the endless green rows. You have survived your first day on the plantation. And you have understood the deepest, most terrifying truth of your new life. Tomorrow will be exactly the same. And here our long and difficult journey together ends. Let the weight of those imaginary chains dissolve into the softness of your bed. Allow the rough, wooden planks of the hold to fade away, replaced by the feeling of the pillow beneath your head. The sounds of the ship, the cries in the dark, the crack of the whip, let them all recede now, like a distant echo falling into silence. You are not there. You are here. You are safe in your own space, in your own time. The story is over. It was a journey through a dark chapter of history, a story we must remember, but it is not your reality. The only sounds now are the gentle hum of the fan you turned on earlier, the quiet stillness of your room, the soft rhythm of your own breathing. The shadows in your room are just shadows. The darkness outside your window is just the night. Let the story drift away, like a ship sailing over the horizon and disappearing into a gentle mist. It's just a whisper now, a story that has been told and is now finished. Let your mind become quiet. Let your body grow heavy with the gentle pull of sleep. There are no more horrors to witness, no more pain to endure. There is only the peaceful, quiet dark, inviting you to rest. The end of the article. Good night.